Welcome back to the Game Collection. I am SuperDerek, and today I'm going to do things a little bit differently for lucky episode number 13. Today I'm going to ask you a question. Is Hydlide really such a bad game?
Hydlide. I hate Hydlide. I hate this game so much.
Oh, Hydlide. Just saying the name gives you a gag reflex like you're about to puke. Hydlide. Sounds so wretched and foul.
This game has been ripped apart by not only the angry video game nerd, not only by ProJared, but what seems like the entire game reviewing community at large. So why would I stick my credibility on the line to defend a game that's just so unanimously hated? Well, it's because this game is really significant for reasons that may surprise you. Well, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. I am SuperDerek, and this is Hydlide. Hydlide is an action RPG for the NES that was released in the US in 1989. This game is actually a precursor to several similar action RPGs such as The Legend of Zelda and Ys. Due to unfortunate localization timing, it was released in the wake of The Legend of Zelda, and as a result is often compared to its much more refined cousin. The story of Hydlide is the basics of basic. In the Kingdom of Fairyland, one of the 3 jewels that was holding a demon at bay was stolen by a thief. This allowed a demon, Voralis, to escape his bonds and return to Fairyland, bringing with him an army of monsters with which to terrorize the land. Upon his triumphant return, his first act was to abolish the monarchy by splitting the princess into 3 fairies. That's when our hero Jim finally decides it's time to kick ass and chew bubblegum. Unfortunately, it becomes immediately evident that Jim, during his time as a knight, must have spent far more time chewing bubblegum than actually kicking ass, as even the lowliest of creatures in Fairyland can easily put an end to his quest. And that's a source of uniqueness for this game. Jim wasn't just some chosen one who is predestined to save the land, who starts off in peak condition. No, Jim is just an ordinary dude like me or you, who just gets fed up with the way things are going and decides to put his foot down and take on the world. And that's kind of a message I can really get behind. However, I don't think that really translates well into fun gameplay, because all you're able to do for the first 20 minutes or so of the game is grind experience points from slimes. As a matter of fact, I had Jim around level 4 before I started doing anything at all. That's 4 out of a maximum of 9 levels. So I guess that this is a good time to talk about combat. It's similar to Ys, where you run into enemies. Jim doesn't really swing a sword on the screen like you would expect from most action RPGs. Instead, pressing the A button switches Jim from defend mode to attack mode. While in attack mode, you deal more damage, but your defense is decreased. There is also a magic system in the game, but I pretty much ignored that because it's worthless for the majority of the game. In Hydlide, there are no hearts to collect, there are no potions, no inns to stay at, so what's a guy to do when he's hurt and injured? Well, that's kind of a neat innovation of this game. It's one of the first games to actually include regenerating health. Simply just standing around on a patch of grass will slowly regenerate Jim's health. Later on in the game, you get a piece of equipment that helps speed up the process, and that's a lifesaver. The process of grinding and healing is a pretty lengthy one, which can wear on the nerves of an intrepid player. Fortunately, the game also has one last feature that'll come in handy: high speed mode. High speed mode doubles the speed of everything but the music inside Hydlide. Monsters move faster, Jim moves faster, Jim heals more quickly, and the increased speed actually helps movement appear more fluid. For my playthrough, this was my preferred method of play. So why all the hate? I already mentioned that this game was released in the wake of The Legend of Zelda, and honestly, that would probably be enough. But there are other reasons that people criticize this game for, including choppy graphics, small world to explore, really short looping songs, extraordinarily difficult tasks, and really cryptic puzzles. Most of these complaints are completely valid, but I can explain them. And to do that, we have to go back in time. In October of 1984, Nihon Falcom released Dragon Slayer. This game featured real-time, action-oriented combat, and an in-game map, an inventory system, and an overhead view. This was the birth of the world's first ever action RPG. The game even sort of featured a soundtrack consisting of beeps and chirps that played the melody of the entertainer. Later that same year, within just a couple of months within the release of Dragon Slayer, Hydlide was also released for the NEC PC-88, hot on the heels of the grandfather of all action RPGs, and the difference is staggering. The polish on Hydlide compared to Dragon Slayer is unquestionable, and considering the development time of games, one has to wonder if Dragon Slayer looks a little rushed by comparison, almost as though there was some sort of race between the two companies to see who could be the first to release such a game. Well, that's entirely speculation, but what I can say for sure is that Hydlide is by far and away the better looking game. Hydlide would be later ported to several other systems including the MSX and the X2 in 1985, which introduced scrolling backgrounds akin to what we see in The Legend of Zelda. And after that to the FM7 and PC-98 as well. In 1986, Hydlide was eventually ported to the Nintendo Famicom, then eventually localized to the United States in 1989. That means, when Americans got their first chance to see Hydlide and play it for the first time, this game had already aged by 5 years. 5. The port of Hydlide to the NES appears to have been based on the MSX port, which utilized the scrolling that we see today. The entire game, and the music from Hydlide 2, were retrofit into a game cartridge the size of Super Mario Bros. And this is the only RPG on the NES to be put on this small, basic cartridge. But why would anybody ever try to do something like that? It doesn't even make sense. Well, the reason is because, as with most poor decisions in the gaming industry, the preferred decision often costs a whole lot more. When the game was programmed for the Famicom, it was 1986, and the chips for the NES games were still very expensive. Increasing the amount of storage space for the game would require that they employ bank switching, which allows the NES to read from additional ROM chips, but requires another chip on board to control and enable access between those chips. This is likely why the music was so limited and the track loops were so short. In regards to the game's choppy visuals, this also is related to the game being a port of the MSX. Normally, NES games that are built from the ground up for the NES take advantage of the Nintendo's built-in smooth scrolling functionality and were designed in order to be compatible with it. However, Hydlide's user interface was pretty much set in stone by this point. The map was established, and there was a set number of tiles per screen. Changing the layout of the GUI frame would mean considerable redesigns of the game world, which would have cost a lot of additional time and money in development. Alternatively, smooth scrolling could have been achieved using the Nintendo's MMC5 chip if it were available at the time, such as what was used in Laser Invasion, which would have likely made the game even more expensive to manufacture. Regarding the cryptic nature of the game and its poor balance, I think that Hydlide deserves a bit of leeway with us because of the fact that this was one of the first of its kind. There wasn't a really well-balanced game to compare it to, and while some things were probably more cryptic than they should have been, most of those puzzles weren't any harder than Zelda. Perhaps the most cryptic puzzle within Zelda, burning a specific bush to reveal an entrance, was a nod back to Hydlide. Some have criticized one particular puzzle in which you have to perform the seemingly impossible task of killing 2 wizards at the same time using the wave spell, which can only be shot horizontally while you're on a vertical patch of ground. However, I found that with a little strategy, this puzzle is easily solvable. I think that the line separating Hydlide from being a great game is surprisingly pretty thin. What is it that separates NES action RPGs that we love, like The Legend of Zelda and Crystalis, from Hydlide? I think that with just 3 simple modifications, this game could have easily stood the test of time with the best of them, and yet still remained an intrinsically Hydlide game. The first order of business, though, would be to completely rework the entire soundtrack. Crystalis had tons of music with long, nice loops, just a whole lot of variety. Hydlide, though, only has 4 tracks. Each one is about 15 seconds long. However, for the majority of the game, you only ever hear one of those songs. I think that removing 2 of the tracks in favor of increasing the length of the overworld theme by 30 seconds or so would go a long way. The other 15-second track should be used inside caves and other structures in order to help provide a break every once in a while from the main theme. Next up, the game balancing just needs to be completely reworked as well. Crystalis implemented the use of an experience point system, increasing the amount of experience points required to level up after each level. This sort of leveling system was already implemented in several RPGs when Hydlide was put out. I think that that sort of mechanic would have stood the test of time a little bit better. Killing 100 enemies to gain a level just seems a little excessive. Also, the game needs a defense mechanic that decreases the amount of damage you take rather than just increasing your health pool. This will address the time that is spent standing still in order to heal, as well as make you feel like you've actually gotten stronger when the slimes can no longer damage you. Lastly, in Crystalis and in Zelda, NPCs were vital for providing hints for how you would actually go about progressing through the game. Zelda had men in caves dispensing swords, and Crystalis had fully fleshed out towns with NPCs that you could actually interact with. At one point, you're even tasked with saving a town that was enslaved. Adding at least one town with NPCs to Hydlide would do wonders. The game needs to give us a sort of a reason to care about defeating Morales. And if we visit a town that's been devastated by an army of monsters, the player will be sympathetic and will want to actually help them. This could also serve an important secondary role for dispensing hints, fleshing out a backstory, as well as adding more diversity to the game's landscape. Hydlide during its time has really taken a verbal beatdown. Had events turned out slightly differently, Hydlide would have been the grandfather of all of the Legend of Zeldas and Secret of Manas, and was certainly the best looking one upon its original release. Unfortunately, the difference between Dragon Slayer and Hydlide is also the same difference that separates Neil Armstrong from Buzz Aldrin, eclipsed by what just amounts to a few short moments in the grand scheme of history. Unfortunately, in America, this game is probably going to go down in history as that one action RPG that wasn't as good as Zelda. But at least the game is recognized and celebrated in Japan as the classic that it is. Receiving multiple other ports and even HD remakes, this game even went on to inspire the battle system for Ys, which is still popular today. All in all, I think that another reason that this game really gets ripped apart is because people have come to expect a lot more from RPGs in the years since this was released. Hydlide really wasn't meant to be an epic quest. In fact, you can probably beat this game in as little as an hour and a half. That's about the same as what it would take to beat Mario, if you took your time with it. And I guess when you look at it that way, it's forgivable that they would decide to give it, shorter looping tracks and put it on a smaller cartridge, because it's not really meant to be, the Odyssey or the Iliad. It's just a simple story about a knight saving a princess who was split into fairies. I'm not gonna recommend this game for everyone. I couldn't, especially when you can get an equally informative and far less frustrating experience just by watching a good Let's Play. Instead, who I will recommend this for are collectors and fans of the genre. Not for the fun that this game most certainly will not bring you, but as a collector's piece, a reminder to show you the roots of where action RPGs have come from. So what I hope to have helped establish here is that while Hydlide isn't exactly a fun game to play by today's standards, it's still very significant to the point where I think it deserves a little bit more respect than what it's been receiving for the role that it's played in helping to shape the action RPG genre. So I guess that brings us back to my original question. What do you think? Is Hydlide really that bad?